At this point, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Rachel Lamb. She serves as the Senior Climate Advisor to the Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment. We're just thrilled to have her come today to only our second annual summit. Many of you are probably tracking the fact that the state just recently released a climate pollution action plan. So she'll be able to share a lot of information on that plan and where we go from here to try to meet our climate goals. And I believe we will have a few minutes at the end of her presentation for questions. So keep your questions in mind as she's delivering her remarks. And there will be some folks up in the back to help you with microphones if you do have questions. Thank you. Please welcome Dr. Lamb.
Well, good morning. It's so good to be with you here. Thank you so much to Dr. Ricker, the Hood College community, and of course the organizers for Mobilize Frederick. It's exciting to see the increase in participation, not only here in this room from participants, but walking around and seeing all the local engagement with businesses and organizations. I heard you at least doubled in size, so that's amazing. And it's good to see all the engagement and excitement around climate because it's going to take all of us, as we know. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about the state's climate action plan, which we just released at the end of December. But hopefully this isn't the first time you're hearing about it, because we spent much of last year with engagement and listening sessions across the state to hear more about priorities, the things that people were experiencing in their households, in their communities, organizations, in their local economies, and try to figure out how we could work together to identify a pathway to reach really ambitious climate goals. So I'm going to start by highlighting what this plan is intended to do. So a couple years ago, the Maryland General Assembly established the most aggressive climate goals of any state in the entire country. So more aggressive than California, more aggressive than New York, more aggressive than Massachusetts. So that goal, reducing emissions 60% by 2031, it's a big deal. But we also established a companion goal to ensure that we could achieve net zero by 2045. And I'm going to come back to that because our 2031 goal says that we have to really focus on decarbonizing across our economy by reducing emissions at their source. But when we think about a robust climate resilient economy and climate resilient communities, focusing on net zero also means paying attention to our natural and working lands, our ag lands, our forests, and our coastal ecosystems. So what this plan does is chart a pathway to not only achieve that 60% reduction goal, but ensure we're thinking long-term, especially when we think about our natural and working lands. Now, importantly, not only do we need to reduce emissions, but we have to think about ways that this plan can also help us grow our economy. We want to make sure that as we're investing in common sense solutions, it's helping us create new net jobs across different sectors of our economy, making sure that we're increasing personal income and increasing GDP. And the bottom line is the plan does show that that's possible, and I'm going to walk through some of those benefits that we hope all Marylanders will experience. And this is a big plan, so I'm going to give you the highlights, but if you want to go look at it yourself, you can check out our website here at the bottom and work through not only the plan, but a lot of the supporting work and analysis that went behind producing it. So first of all, what does this plan look at? I told you that it is an economy-wide plan, so it's looking at all sectors. Those are things like how we get our electricity to our transportation sector, to how we think about residential and commercial buildings, and across our industrial and waste sectors. And as you can see below the zero, so our sinks, we also look at forestry and land use decisions. So the good news is we've made incredible progress so far. What you can see on the left-hand side of this graph is that if we continue implementing everything already on the books and we continue investment at current levels, we are on track to hit a 51% reduction by 2030. So that's good news. And that's because we've had long-term investment from many partners trying to figure out creative strategies. But 51% isn't quite 60%. So to get that additional reductions, we had to think really creatively, and you can see that the slope of those lines on the graph on the right-hand side, which is showing 60%, means we're looking everywhere that we can to find those common sense reductions. One of the things I want to highlight in this conversation with you this morning is focused action on 3 of the largest collective sectors here. So first, we're going to talk about electricity and what it means to make sure that we have reliable, clean electricity. We're then going to talk about transportation, which represents the largest group of emissions in the state. And then we're going to talk specifically about buildings, because when we think about where we use energy and where we use electricity, that's a key sector that our state has been focusing on. And then I'll make a couple comments about the importance of forestry and land use, which is particularly important to me. All right, so I said good news because we've seen that we're on track to, at least with current policies, reduce emissions 51%. And part of that success is because of how dramatically we've reduced emissions in the electricity sector to date. So we have really taken a systematic look through support from really innovative multi-state programs like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and thinking about how to incentivize clean energy through renewable energy portfolio standards. We've been able to dramatically reduce emissions from this sector over time. So you can see that we've reduced coal. We are continuing to try to find ways to reduce emissions from net imported electricity. And we're really trying to then in turn ramp up the good stuff, ramp up renewables. This is a really key part of cleaning up the entire economy, right? Because if we're electrifying our vehicles and we're electrifying our buildings, we get the greatest benefit when we're also making sure the electricity that they're using is clean. This is, of course, really important to the governor as well, because he has set a really ambitious goal of achieving 100% clean electricity by 2035. And so some of what the plan shows is not only our current strategies and how to continue perhaps modifying them to ensure those declines remain over time, but actually thinking about other regulatory approaches or other strategies to make sure that we are indeed keeping the grid clean. The good news as well is that electrification is already underway. So sometimes it seems perhaps a bit intimidating to think about all the electricity that might be needed in the process of electrifying everything and then making sure that everything that needs electricity has it reliably. But what we've seen is higher levels of adoption over time in terms of electric vehicles, where one of the leading, best-selling and leading vehicles in the entire country last year was a Tesla Model Y. And that is not the only kind of model that we're seeing hit the economy. We're increasingly seeing more competitive prices, more diverse options to help meet people where they're at. We also see that now in the state and in the country as a whole, that heat pumps are actually outselling conventional furnaces. So we're seeing more comfort with these solutions, and we're also seeing that because of higher levels of adoption and more competition in the marketplace, that the cost of these options are also increasingly going down. So seeing that electrification is underway, seeing that we're increasingly able to supply the grid with clean electricity is a really encouraging trend. And we also just saw recently with a study from the Public Service Commission, when asked if the grid can reliably handle all of this increased demand, they said, yes, it can. And that's because the growth that they anticipate happening into the future is the same, if not a little less, than what they anticipated and had already planned for over the last 40 years. So we need to make sure we have a reliable grid. We need to make sure the grid is increasingly clean, and we need to make sure that that transition supports electrification, of course, in our transportation and our building sector. So what about transportation? I don't think this is unique to Maryland, but it is true for us, as I mentioned, that 40% of our emissions statewide come from transportation. And if you look at this graph, you can see different colors representing different parts of the transportation sector. So on-road vehicles, like our passenger vehicles or our trucks, and then additional non-road vehicles. And that might be thinking about like in our agricultural landscape with agricultural vehicles. Most of the approaches that the plan proposes target on-road vehicles because, as you can see, that's where we see the greatest proportion of emissions coming from. So good news here is that we've made significant advancements, especially over the last year with the administration, to really think about how to help move the entire manufacturing industry alongside other states to increasingly produce more electric vehicles, more electric cars, and more electric trucks. So that might be what you hear of as advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks. Those are policy frameworks which help move the economy towards an increasing supply of electric vehicles. The plan also works in partnership with many state agencies. So even though the Department of the Environment is working to kind of look across the economy and support policies that make sense, like advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks, we work really closely with the Maryland Department of Transportation to really also think about, and the Department of Planning, to think about how we do smart development and to help reduce vehicle miles traveled, and also think about investments to public transportation. The needs are going to look different across the state of Maryland, right? The needs here in central Maryland compared to what might be an additional investment needed on the eastern shore or western Maryland might look different. So how do we think about that strategically and make critical investments to really reduce emissions across the board? So a lot of work ongoing here and more that we can continue to do together. One of the things that it's going to take to support electrification of vehicles is charging. So I know that maybe for a lot of you, if you're considering whether or not you want to get an electric vehicle, one of the things that you might ask is, well, how far can I go on a single charge, or what happens if I'm trying to go somewhere and I don't have access to a charger? So we recognize that in addition to making sure that you have diverse options for electric vehicles and helping to make them more affordable and shift the market, we also need to make sure that we're making investments in charging. So this is a map that is supported and updated regularly with our partners at the Maryland Department of Transportation, looking at how they're capitalizing on all of this new federal money that's going into fast chargers along some of our major highways and routes, and then continuing to look at where we need to make more targeted investments of charging to make sure that everyone has access to level 2 or higher chargers. So there are many corridor-ready areas, as you can see on this map, and then more that we need to do to continue scaling investment. We want to especially look at ways that we can scale charging in multifamily homes. So many of us might own our own personal home, and there's lots of opportunity to install charging at home, but we also need to think about options if we live at townhouses or apartments where we might share parking. We need to make those options more accessible for folks. So in addition to being able to charge your vehicle maybe on a highway or charging it at a grocery store, you also have an option to charge it at home. And already we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this charging network, and with a lot of new federal funds, we're poised to scale. All right, so what about buildings? This is a hot topic, and this is something that we are trying to continue implementing with support, of course, of local governments, because when we think about large buildings, not only are that large commercial buildings where we might go shopping or where that home a lot of our big businesses, but we're also thinking about important buildings like community buildings, public buildings, schools. We want to make sure that everyone has access to the resources that they need to be able to continue becoming more energy efficient and also saving money by doing so. So of course, one of the policies that our plan highlights is building energy performance standards, which are really trying to help provide that long runway for planning so that business owners can take advantage of a lot of the money that's out there, help make their buildings more efficient, and increasingly reduce emissions from the sector. We also are considering supporting policies that also help look at the role that clean heat and zero-emission appliances play in making our buildings cleaner, greener, and healthier. And buildings are really important because not only are investments in buildings good for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping fight climate, but they can also have a lot of really important co-benefits for indoor air quality and supporting healthy air for a lot of our communities. I told you that there were a lot of economic benefits associated with doing this, and one of the ones that I want to highlight, which I think I actually saw represented in some of the businesses that were in the exhibit hall, was that this kind of investment in cleaning our buildings and electrifying transportation also means that there's a lot of opportunity for new good-paying jobs. That's because there's a lot of trades that will continue to be in high demand to do things like installing heat pumps or helping to have trained electricians to help make sure that our buildings and our homes are retrofitted to support our charging infrastructure and make sure that we have cleaner heat. Our analysis showed that on net, we will be able to create 27,000 new jobs and that we see growth across multiple sectors of industries. I think that's a good news story also when considering that we're here at a university, thinking about that next generation of impact when we're training new minds to help us solve really complicated problems, that will also follow with new innovative jobs and an opportunity to think more creatively about the kinds of technologies and businesses that we're going to need to meet this new demand. The good news is also that this kind of transition to electrification is good for households. So I'm really interested in my household in thinking about how this kind of investment saves me money. So if I was driving a gas vehicle and I had a home that used gas appliances, and I decided to install a heat pump and decided to get an EV, a used EV or a new EV, I would be able to save instantly $2,600 a year just by making the switch. And if, for example, my home was instead maybe fueled by oil or propane, my savings is even higher, which means it goes to about $4,000 annually. So that kind of savings is important for all of us, especially those of us on a budget, because we need to make sure, again, that the choices we make for a cleaner and greener climate also help us and help all Marylanders be able to make that transition affordably. We know that some of these new solutions can cost money up front. So one of the things that we tried to emphasize in our plan is the incredible amount of federal incentives that are there to support and mitigate some of those upfront costs. So you may have heard with, of course, big federal legislation, something called the IRA or the Inflation Reduction Act. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing to navigate because it invested billions of dollars across the entire economy. If you go to this website, for example, energy.gov/save, and there's a couple of supporting websites, what's really interesting is you can go in and put in your information about maybe where you live, or if you rent or you own a home, or what kind of vehicle you drive, and it can actually help you calculate and estimate the savings that you would get as tax credits for making some of those switches, for example, to heat pumps or to electric vehicles. One of the key features or benefits of this kind of program is also something called a home energy audit. Home energy audits can be really valuable because sometimes it's hard to know how to sequence improvements. Maybe I want to weatherize my home to make sure, that if I'm increasing, that I'm not increasing or losing energy by making other investments like heat pumps, right? I want to make sure maybe I weatherize my home first and then install a heat pump to get maximum savings. So what an audit can help you do is just help look at your particular situation, understand what you're spending, sequence things, and then help you get the maximum bang for your buck. So these kinds of federal credits are already out there, and the state is matching those with additional rebates. So with over $137 million more about set to flow through the Maryland Energy Administration, what we're trying to do is give you multiple options where you can get federal credits as well as take advantage of these rebates for installing these new equipment. And they could come from anything from a heat pump here to upgrading your electric panel and others. So we know that it's going to take a lot of investment to help move the economy, but the good news here is this immediate savings that many families will experience in making the shift. All right, so here's one of my other favorite ones, is in addition to looking very seriously at decarbonizing across our economy, right? Cleaning our electricity, making sure that we're reducing emissions from transportation, and targeting high-emitting sectors like buildings. We also need to keep in mind that this is a long-term investment. And those long-term investment towards net zero is making sure that our communities continue to stay resilient in the face of ongoing climate impacts. Investments in our natural and working lands, in our forests, and in urban tree planting, our agricultural soils, and our coastal ecosystems is a good bet. It's a good return on our investment, because not only are we helping to capture carbon from the atmosphere and store it in these natural systems, but these same natural systems are also helping us with cleaner air, cleaner water, helping us reach our Chesapeake Bay commitments, and helping us be more resilient to ongoing impacts. There's a lot of work that already happens in this state, and I know that Frederick County especially has been a part of playing a leading role in this, where we've had lots of ongoing forest management activities where farmers are already on the front lines of adopting many best management practices. And what the plan does is looks at everything that our landowners have been providing to date in terms of benefits, and then identifies that next set of opportunities where expanding some of these practices or thinking about places where we can literally grow our investment and plant more trees in strategic areas can really help us fill that remaining potential. And of course, just like all of these strategies, we have to do this in partnership. So it's the state working in partner with our counties, with our municipalities, with our private landowners, with our NGOs, to make sure that we're thinking about this strategically. And that's also really important in the terms of land use planning. So I know sometimes there's a lot of good questions about how we think strategically about growing our investments in clean energy like solar, while making sure that we can continue to advance really important priorities around agriculture, food production, and improved agricultural soil management. We have to talk about them together, and we can identify win-win solutions that are durable for multiple generations. All right, so we talked a lot about the opportunities that are available today through the federal credits, through additional state rebates, and the fact that many of us are going to experience immediate savings when we make that transition. But we know that to shift the economy across all of those sectors for multiple years is going to take important additional investment. So what the plan takes a look at is thinking about the acceleration needed. If we could identify collectively an additional $1 billion of investment across the board, not from taxpayers, but with the general principle of looking at how to target that investment to Marylanders by having polluters pay, that could really help us accelerate progress together faster. So some of the options that we included in the plan are some that are shown on this slide, thinking about ranging opportunities to build from our experience and success in multi-state cap and invest strategies to really going after additional federal competitive grants. Actually there are 3 federal grants which the state is currently has an application for, is applying for, that could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars to the state. One of them, which I'll highlight, is the EPA's Carbon Pollution Reduction Grant Implementation Program, where we're actually working with counties and local governments to capitalize on this federal funding and make sure that that funding actually gets to where it's most needed on the ground to really help our communities make this transition. So we're thinking creatively about how to go after federal competitive funds and really think about important financial instruments to really help make the transition. But it's going to continue to take all of us thinking critically and creatively, like we're doing right now with the General Assembly during session, about how we can find ways to continue accelerating progress here. So I already mentioned to you the importance of the additional job benefits that this kind of plan provides. But I also want to highlight a couple of other aspects of economic benefit. So of course, as we're thinking about increases in job opportunities and in employment, we also see a corresponding increase in personal income. So working with the economists and the scientists, we show that if we're on track to implement a lot of the policies and the investments that we need in the state to reach our ambitious goals, that's going to increase personal income in the state by $2.5 billion and grow Maryland's gross domestic product by $5.3 billion between now and 2031. That is a significant additional investment in our economy that all of us will benefit from. In addition to feeling the economic benefit is the importance of health benefits. So we estimate again that if we are able to implement this plan, that it will also help secure between $142 and $321 million in additional health benefits. And that's because we know that a lot of dirty fossil fuels have a really significant impact, not just on air quality, but those co-pollutants or those harmful air pollutants are really what's driving, in part, a lot of those negative health impacts. So it's a common, a smart, common sense solution to make an investment in not only these solutions which help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but help us continue to clean up our air pollution. And a lot of the benefits that we see are going to be able to help some of our communities that have been historically disadvantaged because they are already underserved or have been historically overburdened. So what we want to make sure to do is that everyone benefits, including those who might be already on the front lines of negative health benefits. And while a lot of what we're talking about here is what happens locally in our backyards, in our county, in our communities, in our state, Maryland's role actually has an outsized influence on global conversations. And I know this can be hard, perhaps, to wrap your mind around, because it seems like Maryland is just one small player or one small part of a larger global problem. But I want to give you an example of something I experienced recently. So I had the opportunity to go with Secretary McElwain to the largest global convening of national and subnational governments, the COP28 meetings back in November. Sometimes we think that's kind of like these big national governments that are kind of deciding what to do to meet these ambitious targets, and that's very true. But for one of the first times, local, or what they call subnational, so state-level governments, were considered official delegates and parties to the conversation. And when the secretary was sitting on all these panels and having discussions with leaders from around the world, they were consistently amazed and inspired by the work that's happening right here in Maryland. Not only are our goals very ambitious, but we have innovative policy strategies and a track record of success that actually builds credibility and raises ambition in those conversations. People actually ultimately want to know if a national government is going to reach their goal, what states, for example, are doing to help get there. So we all play a role. It is all of our responsibility, and we need those front edge, those leaders, to be able to step out in order to really galvanize more action. So we can't lose sight of the original purpose, that this is a global problem. But the good news is, by taking those first steps here at home, not only can we realize those benefits in our backyard, but we actually are providing positive pressure to conversations far and above just our state. All right, I told you a lot about what our plan includes. Well, now we got to get to work on implementing it. We have between now and 2031 to reach our targets, which means our agency and our partners at the state level and local level, and all of you, are going to have to think about the actions that we can take to start making progress. So I already mentioned we are working really hard to leave no federal dollar on the table and maximizing every competitive grant opportunity we can. But we're also going to be starting and launching many of the regulatory processes. So we identified many policies that can help provide a new trajectory for our economy and our industries, and we're going to be getting to work on that this year, building off the track record that we already had around buildings and clean cars and clean trucks. There's also an institution in the state which you may be aware of, but it's the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, which is a really unique, bipartisan, cross-sectoral commission that has really robust discussions about how the state's really going to be able to mitigate climate change and be able to adapt to the changes that we're already experiencing. This group has representation from industry, from environmental groups, from local governments, from state governments, and they convene every year with engagement from the public to really continue to think about, for example, this plan and how they might continue to have conversations about how to implement it, to even coming up with new recommendations to send directly to the governor and the General Assembly. I want you to know about this commission because the state agency works really hard to engage and convene with it, and it's another avenue for all of you who are mobilizing and continuing to raise your voices to have input into the process as we move forward. And then, of course, we're going to continue to look at evaluating all of the funding mechanisms that we have and continue to work together with our partners to find the ones that make sense and can help us better achieve our goals. So lots of good progress. We aren't starting from scratch. We're building off of decades of investment, and we're excited to continue to get to work to help realize that next future that we're all working towards, which is cleaner, healthier, and helps us fight one of the greatest crises of our time, which is climate. Thank you.
I think we can go ahead and take questions now.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm a 7-year owner of a Tesla. But I'm worried about what happens to the battery when this car dies. And what plans are there in place when we get a proliferation of lithium-ion batteries that are exhausted and need to be recycled? I know Redwood Materials has a plant in Nevada, but we're kicking the can down a little bit of the road by if we don't have an effective plan to handle spent EV batteries.
Yeah, just like any new technology and solution, we have to think about it holistically, right? So we're innovating and on the front edge of creating a range of electric vehicles. So on the front end, like you're talking about, looks like you've been in the game for 7 years. So that's great. You were an early adopter. And we're starting to see more opportunities in the marketplace. So if it's not just Tesla, but it's a range of other manufacturing, we're starting to see more diversity and maybe improvements in technology on the front end because we're seeing more folks participating. And at the same time, states are having to think about, how to scale recycling operations or help EV owners think about what happens when their battery needs to be replaced. Our current vehicles have a lot of maintenance that's required on them. They cost a lot, and we built infrastructure to kind of help think about scrap metal and a lot of the other things that are related to owning gas cars. So we need to continue to do the same thing with electric vehicles. And actually, battery recycling is one of the topics that the Commission has talked about and will increasingly talk about, and is something that our state is having a conversation with other states about as well. So it's not just a single state solution, but as multiple states are working to increase EV adoption, we're going to have to be thinking about that. So yes.
To follow up on that question, as an owner of a Kia EV6, I don't have access to charging stations for my car. Tesla has them all over the place. I heard your plan to increase the charging stations, but how is that progressing? I tried to travel to Shenandoah, North Carolina recently, and I had a lot of problem getting there because of lack of charging stations. How is that accelerating now?
Well, there's actually a shift nationally to actually make it so that all vehicle charging stations can utilize Tesla plugs. So that actually is a big shift because now instead of having perhaps 10 different kinds of charging plugs and making it really challenging for other vehicles that are non-Teslas to be able to use those charging stations, they're actually equalizing them and opening up opportunities. Maybe Tesla owners might not like that because they're going to have more competition at their same charging. But the good news on that is that everyone will then be able to use the same charging network. So that's one big federal, national level shift that's happened. And yeah, the federal government has to continue to get a lot of that big money that they have out the door. So lots of states are starting to receive funding from a program called NEVI to be able to really make sure that if you are driving from here to Shenandoah and you're utilizing main highways or otherwise, that you have access to the charging stations you need. So we've made progress, but we need to continue to scale investment on that.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious about the governor's bill that he's working on with the legislature about reducing regulatory requirements and allowing the Public Service Commission to lower the regulatory burden on the diesel backup generators for data centers. And I'm wondering how that squares with the governor's interest in reducing, as you were just mentioning, air pollution along with greenhouse gas emissions.
We have to find ways to creatively grow our economy and thinking about that across the board. And we also have to continue to, of course, support discussions where we are pushing the envelope on greener, more creative solutions. So we want to be able to learn from our neighbors and maybe find pathways and opportunities where data centers can help, meet competitive economic opportunities for the state. And we're going to have ongoing conversations to make sure that to the extent that we can encourage greener adoption of energy and electricity needs for those same facilities.
First, thanks for a really encouraging presentation. This was such good news. I'm somewhat new to these facts, and I found it wonderfully encouraging and motivating. I do have a question. For those particularly who are interested in doing more work in this area, it has two parts. The first is, I'm curious about your personal journey. Obviously, you have a PhD, you did a doctorate somewhere, you got involved in this. I'm curious as to how you wound up doing what you did. And the other thing is, with the recent switch in administrations, gubernatorial administrations, I'm wondering what sort of the shift from Larry Hogan to Wes Moore may mean, pluses and minuses on either side for these kinds of things. I know it's big. So your personal journey, a little bit about the shift of governors.
Well, just on the last point, I mean, we're really excited about the leadership of the administration on climate, and I feel very confident that we're going to get to work on implementing it. So Secretary McElwain, really has helped shepherd this process for the climate plan in this first year when you're just hitting the ground running, and she's really serious about making sure that we can walk the walk on climate action and make sure that we pay attention to how we can secure economic benefits for all Marylanders, especially those that have been historically underserved and overburdened. She's serious about that. And so being able to work for her, and of course the governor is really encouraging, because I'm not just telling you this because I want you to be encouraged, but because I'm also personally encouraged being in the thick of things about the direction that we're headed in. So yeah, my personal story is that I was really interested in conservation and environmental science, and being outdoors and engaging with the natural world. I felt really compelled about my responsibility to protect it. And one of the things that I kept experiencing when I was talking with communities or learning more and studying our natural systems was how predominant the threat of climate change was on not only our ability for human communities to flourish, but also our natural communities, knowing that we all have to rely on the natural world around us to be healthy and well. And so in studying that and in learning more about some of the frontline climate impacts, I knew that I wanted to find some way to use this new understanding and ongoing understanding of science that science provides us about the world around us and about the impacts of climate, and actually couple it with policy making so that decisions can, one, be informed by good science, but actually help us make a difference in the areas that we know count. So I had the opportunity to participate as a science policy fellow with the state, and then was able to be in this role where my day-to-day is very much policy oriented, but one of the benefits of having that science lens that it kind of invites you to dig into the details and understand the data, understand what we know and where there's uncertainties, and then really work hard to talk about that with others to see where we can find solutions together. So that's a truncated version of my story, but one of the reasons I really enjoy my job, because even though this is hard stuff, it's a big problem, and it's going to take a lot of us. There are really specific, tangible things that we can identify as solutions that really do help us make progress.
Thanks for being here, Doctor. That was a great presentation, and applause to the state for putting together such a terrific plan. Well, truth in advertising, I'm one of those members of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, representing the local governments around the state of Maryland. And if you could talk a little bit about adaptation, because even if this plan works as advertised perfectly and the whole world follows the lead of Maryland, we're still going to be realizing impacts due to climate change based on the greenhouse gas emissions that have occurred to date. And places like Somerset County, Maryland, with Smith Island, which is slowly going away, and our state capital, which sees more sunny day flooding all the time, and places like Charles County, where I'm from, that are inundated with more frequent and intense storm events that are overwhelming the stormwater management systems there. And then out here in Western Maryland, where they're so dependent on the natural resource economy, and that's going to be changing quite a bit, and wildfires becomes an issue. What are some of the state policies regarding helping local governments to deal with those changes that are on their way?
Yeah, I appreciate the emphasis on adaptation and resilience at the same time as we're working hard to reduce emissions. And the good news is that a lot of the solutions that we want to propose can be good for both. In that if we are increasingly seeing extreme heat and weather events, that thinking critically about where we're planting trees and how we think about improving our buildings can actually help protect people from the worst of those impacts. So sometimes you can find those win-win solutions that, again, help us with mitigation and adaptation. But you're right, the investment that we need, the magnitude of investment that we need to ensure that we can continue to adapt is significant. So our agency, the Maryland Department of the Environment, in addition to thinking about mitigation and air quality and investment, is we also support water. So you're talking about flooding and stormwater and sea level rise and inundation, and we spend hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, some of which we give directly to finance local government efforts through our state revolving loan funds, to really scale that critical thinking about how we're permitting our facilities to make sure that they're prepared for the storm, the new storm of today and that storm of the future, to help make sure that we're reducing downstream flooding impacts. So that's one example. But we are investing a lot in how we think about our built infrastructure and our green and blue infrastructure to help mitigate some of those effects, not just on extreme heat, which I mentioned, which maybe relates also to air quality issues, but also to water. So the Maryland Commission on Climate Change has multiple working groups. One is the Adaptation and Resilience Working Group, which spent quite a long time talking about that next generation of investment that's required, building off of what state agencies are already doing. Our department is right there thinking about those strategies, and the governor recently appointed a chief resilience officer who's going to be working over the next year to take a lot of that work that's happening already, make sure that it's aligned and strategic so that we can continue to be a good partner with local governments to understand your needs and implement good solutions.
Yeah, thanks very much, and keep up the great work.
Yeah.
We really appreciate your remarks, and I think it gives us a great framework to think about as we're here for the next day and a half and looking at all the other things that are going on locally. So again, please thank Dr. Lamb.
One last thing, my email is right up here. Sorry, I didn't leave the slide on that one. Of course, our website where you can find our plan, and my email is up here. So if you have any additional questions or you want to talk further, just shoot me a note. Thank you.